Hi, you're welcome back to Rethinking Lagos podcast. Yes, this is another episode of Rethinking Lagos. My name is Deji Akinpelu, your host, and we're continuing on our series on housing in the city of Lagos. And today we're going to be looking at driving affordability in the housing sector in the city of Lagos. And to do justice to that topic with me is Comrade Gbenga Akomolafe, the Secretary General of the Federation of Informal Workers of Nigeria, FIWON. Mr. Gbenga Akomolafe, it's so nice to have you on our program.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we're talking about the big topic in the city of Lagos. I mean, everybody talks about it, housing, and the challenges that surrounds it. Definitely, the city of Lagos has its housing deficiency, but really, how big? I know you lead a team of the informal sector in the city of Lagos. What is the housing scenario with this group of people that you lead? The artisans and the informal workers that we have in the city of Lagos.
Well, that's a good question. Actually, working people victims of poor housing policy of the Lagos state government. Um, these are people with very limited earning capacity. They are the lowest rung of the production chain, mostly in the service sectors as traders, market women, street vendors, uh, tailors, garment makers, shoe makers, um, the hairdressers, barbers, and so on and so forth. So these categories of people, as is well known, don't have fixed incomes, and the incomes can be very irregular and can also be extremely unpredictable. To compound the situation for them is the fact that you have conflicting and sometimes ever-changing government policies that makes planning and projection, even at that level, very difficult, if not outrightly impossible. And of course, we also have the ever-present problem of evictions. These are a class of workers that get regularly evicted from their work clusters and workspaces and markets and production clusters by the Lagos state government. Of course, we all know also that informal workers are the ones that live mostly in informal settlements because that's what they can afford. In the absence of government deliberate intervention in the housing sector in terms of direct government investment, like we have had in the past, when government actually invested in building housing estates, low-cost housing estates, specifically targeted at the low-income bracket, which encompasses the informal sector. And of course, as we know, Lagos State is said to be 75% informal in terms of the production mode. So which means that the overwhelming majority of the working population actually in the informal sector.
Yeah.
And they are also the ones that live in the informal settlements, which get regularly demolished, and people get evicted without any form of arrangement to have them relocated to some other alternative housing. So usually when you have evictions, either of the workplace or even worse of the informal settlement, is especially for the informal settlement, it's double whammy because the guy and his family is actually losing his home, probably the school that his child attends, because that school is also going to be located in that informal settlement, and the markets where the wife also works and also his own small shed where he practices his carpentry or something. So he's losing livelihood, he's losing his home, he's losing, the children are losing schooling and so on and so forth. So it's almost equivalent to a natural disaster in terms of the shock. And that's why from our surveys and investigation over the years, each time you have eviction, people die. People just die of the shock. People go on terminal illnesses. People just collapse because, where do you start from? You lost your job, you lost your home.
Any recent ones
Of course, right now, we're having more of workplace eviction in recent times, particularly in the Lagos Island. And of course, perhaps we know about the fire around, what do they call is it Martins? Where there was a fire outbreak, and ordinarily you expect the government to come in with some ameliorative measures, because a fire outbreak is an incident that could happen, even in the best of circumstances where people are prepared for it, with maybe fire extinguishers, with a ready fire brigade, public sector managed fire brigade system that kind. Even in those best of circumstances, you still have fire outbreaks, and of course you expect ameliorative measures in terms of emergency measures by the government to resettle people, to take care of trauma that people suffer, and also to see how people can be compensated in the short term so that they can continue to live their lives. But what did we have? The Lagos State government moved in and shut them out of the place that got burnt, and went ahead to close 8 other markets that were not even affected by the fire. So it will appear as if the fire was now became a pretext to actually evict people.
Under what reasons would they give for the other closures?
I really wouldn't understand, but for several years now, Lagos Island generally is increasingly becoming a target of property speculators. They want to find a way of dislodging these people and taking over those spaces for their own uses, and so we've had this series of evictions, cases in court, and so on and so forth in the island. Of course, government will tell you that, hey, we want to regulate how people are managing their spaces, their buildings, and of course, there's a lot of conversion of residential buildings to markets for commercial uses, and of course, government has a responsibility to regulate, but of course, it shouldn't be a rocket science for government to intervene to set up basic parameters and supervise to ensure that people actually comply with those parameters,
But I think
rather than coming intently and carrying out sporadic evictions.
I think we have a situation on ground where the a lot of contraventions have happened over time, and now, okay, government wants to retrace back its steps, but we are not doing it exclusively, because to me also some of these things that have happened has also happened in connivance with government agencies itself. And now somebody is now trying to take advantage of a situation. Now, whenever this fire outbreak happens, then suddenly somebody brings out the big stick to say, hey, no, this is never meant to be.
Get out of that place.
Get out of that place. And it seems like, to me, like the convenient truth for those who now do the urban planning. Like, before the fire outbreak, you never saw anything wrong. Nobody ever spoke about it.
Mm-hmm.
But now there's now a fire outbreak, and uh, you're now trying to bring out the big stick. But what should you, maybe can you give us in details, what should rather be the approach to really addressing this problem to safeguard the livelihood of these women, men, these informal workers? What should be the more detailed approach to, particularly in this case of that we have?
Yeah, generally, what one would expect is that, first of all, Lagos State government fulfill its statutory obligation of ensuring that uh, building construction generally complies with extant regulations. It is government's business to ensure compliance. So if I'm building and I'm contravening basic rules and guidelines, and nobody is checking me, the government officials are supposed to regulate and manage are actually turning the other eye, or they are getting compromised, as is most often likely going to be the case. Then after everything has been done, years after, somebody wakes up and now wants to blame the people who are already occupying those spaces, and want to subject them to all manner of inhuman treatments in the name of you want to redress certain anomalies that have been I mean, it's just blaming. Because most often, by the time you are doing your evictions, it's not even the owner of the house, the person who built and did all the contraventions, that is occupying the building. You know, the building has been let out to people.
Somebody who just paid rent like 2 months ago. 2 months ago.
Like 2 months ago, and maybe for 2 or 3 years, and you are coming from nowhere to say, hey, you contravene, get out. I mean, no government that really run its affairs as with a sense of responsibility to the people that is supposed to serve, conducts itself, the government of managing public spaces that way. It's just irresponsible. First of all, you refuse to do your work of ensuring that people build according to extant regulations and guidelines. Then years later, you come back to criminalize people who didn't know anything about what has happened, and then you render them homeless, jobless, and destroy their lives and livelihoods. So we think there's a simple, better, much more better way to manage.
Which would
The government departments and agencies responsible for managing buildings should do their work. And that's the first thing. Secondly, when contraventions are observed, you don't wait until there's a fire outbreak. People have even alleged that maybe it's government agents that set up the fire in the first instance. It will sound so. Because why do you have to wait for a fire outbreak or maybe a building collapse before you now come in with your fire brigade approach? So, hey, these things are not even supposed to be there. You don't need to wait for a disaster to happen.
Yeah, we are now being, the way the markets are designed, the way the contraventions have gone, it's now difficult for fire service to come in.
Yes, so for even the fire, I mean, we will expect that. Let's take. I mean, let's admit. Let's even, for purpose of arguments, say that yes, people at fault. They build in contravention of external rules and regulations, blah blah blah, and so on. And government somehow didn't know about it for decades. You want to assume that somewhere along the line, somebody should wake up to his responsibility to say, oh, these things are not supposed to be like this. Engage those communities and ensure that the right things are done and that corrective measures are taken. That could be easily done without really waiting for a fire outbreak or a building collapse as an excuse to come in to now implement inhuman evictions. So
In fact, I think some of those, the way, because I tried to do a study and look at the way neighborhood businesses have developed in the city of Lagos. Simply because we have not been able to deliberately demarcate areas for community markets, or we have very few. The area where I live, the landmass for the market is extremely small to the population of the people who live in the area. So inevitably, people started doing contraventions, extending their households to start building shops. These are responses to a vacuum that is not being filled. This is probably the way we got to where we are.
Yeah, that's part of it. Sometimes you hear people talking of a master plan. So you wonder, where is the master plan coming from? Who drew the master plan? Who is the master plan meant for? So if the master plan is meant for estimated 16 million inhabitants of Lagos State, how were they involved in the design of that master plan to ensure that I'm a little bit familiar with the Alhaji Lateef Jakande government's social houses all over the place. You look at those estates, you find that you have the buildings, you have markets, you have schools, you have space for church, mosque, complete communities with the basic needs that will be needed in those communities anticipated and provided for.
The basic infrastructure.
The basic infrastructures provided for: water, electricity, accessible road, and so on and so forth, are put in place. The building itself might be very simple, but the infrastructure, the basic infrastructures are there, and they serve their purpose. And decades after, they are still there. I've seen some of the buildings looking very modern on the outside that have been built in recent years by so-called developers, crumbling in a matter of a few years. And the much maligned Jakande houses are still there decades after. Whether because I've heard people say, I've even heard people saying those are poultry buildings. They are not looking fanciful. But for me, those kind of attitudes are simply elitist and idiotic in the circumstance we have found ourselves. So what I'm basically saying is that town planning is not rocket science. You can anticipate urban development, and you can also anticipate basic needs and make provisions in terms of basic infrastructure that should be put in place. If 75% of Lagos State is informal, your planning should also reflect that reality.
The planning right now, what do you think is feeding into? If it's not,
you expect. Again, it's unfortunate that we keep making Jakande a reference so many decades after. You do what he did. He built markets. He built neighborhood markets all over the place. You understand? He built mechanic villages. He built aluminium fabrication clusters. He built sawmills and carpentry clusters all over the place, so people can work. These are simple structures that people can affordably, access to do to earn their livelihoods. Now, if we don't expect that the population will be static decades, 40 years after, and will remain the same, and instead of you to provide even more spaces or finding a way of increasing the quantum of access to existing. What I mean is that, for instance, you take a mechanic village, you have maybe 50 mechanics in that particular village. There's a way you can intervene to still the little space. You can replan the space to accommodate maybe 200, rather than just demolishing it, selling it to some speculators who erect buildings that are of no relevance, of no immediate relevance to the life of the people that you have evicted, who can no longer even afford whatever has been put up, and so on and so forth. So the approach to planning is episodic, people say it's elitist, but I would expect that an elitist planning process will be much more deliberate and intentional, will be much more, a little bit more scientific. I don't even see any elitism there. I see a lot of insensitivity, I see a lot of planlessness, I see a lot of knee-jerk, episodic, approach to management and governance of public spaces. And that's a crisis.
If I may.
And so when you have that kind of situation, 75% of the economy is informal, and people are forced to work under uncertainties and extreme precarity. For them to even plan, to say, okay, on the basis of this, my small business, I will be able to build my own house.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult.
I mean, it's a case of uncertainty right now. I don't know who can sit down right there now in the city of Lagos and say, I am very, very sure that I have gotten somewhere that I can now rest. Because even the best of contracts, I mean, look at the highbrow Lekki landmark. I mean, they had to give way. It's pretty much like a situation of uncertainty as far as I'm concerned. But however, how your organization and your members, how are you trying to make the best out of this very sad situation in terms of housing for your members?
Yeah, it's difficult, and it's even more difficult now with the economic situation in the country. But what we have done is to establish a cooperative, a multipurpose cooperative society, and we encourage our members to join. In fact, most of our members in Lagos State now are also members of the FIWON multipurpose cooperative, and we use it as a means of actually making services available. Health insurance. Most of our members in Lagos, they are now insured through the cooperative. So what that means is, through the cooperative, you can save. You are encouraged to save. No amount is too small to save. No amount is too big to save. The saving mechanism is very flexible. You can save several times a day, because the incomes come in trickles. So sometimes maybe market is good, so you are able to save, and sometimes it may not be so good, and you are not able to save. It's not nobody holds you for it. So we encourage savings, and from the pool of savings, it's become possible now to say, okay, I want to do health insurance for 12,000 naira per annum. I'm interested in FIWON mortgage scheme. I want also to buy a piece of land and gradually build. I want to procure equipment for my work. The machine I'm using is getting old and rusty. I need a new equipment. So through the cooperative, you can also access loans or assistance to do that. So we also work with a number of intentional agencies to get some of this equipment at subsidized rates. We also provide even solar renewable technologies for people to be able to cope with unstable power supply and all of that. So that's what we try to do with our cooperative. Now the mortgage thing is a bit new. We just started, I think about 2019 specifically, just before COVID. And then COVID came and everything scattered. So we were able to procure a piece of land near Mawuko, actually at Mawuko, close to the University of Agric, Abeokuta. Of course, we have to go to Ogun State because that's what our people can afford. And so there was actually a lot of enthusiasm. In fact, the first 2 acres we got was snapped in a matter of weeks. But unfortunately, like I said, and people were already talking of building, We're already thinking of getting some kind of site manager, somebody, a building professional that can assist people who want to build and all of that. COVID happened to disrupt all of that. Then Emefiele's currency
change.
whatever, and all those nonsense. And of course, that also disrupted micro businesses and made life very, very hellish for people. But again, life has to continue.
So it's safe to say that it is possible for you to get people in the informal sector into an organized financial system to begin to secure their own um, housing dreams. So, but however, I can see that your members are making a lot of effort to secure their own housing dream. What kind of policies do you think would aid this process on the side of the government?
Yeah, government can still do a lot, and of course has a responsibility to do much more to assist organizations like cooperatives and other um, initiatives by organizations and people to help themselves. Government, in theory, owns the land, have you? Yeah, so that's the starting point. Government can help land, accessing land for cooperatives and groups like that, social groups like that, easier.
Rather than just focusing on developers?
Rather than just focusing on developers and the big monies they want to make through the developers. They can help cooperative units like that to be able to access land, which is perhaps one of the biggest obstacles. We can't even get land around Lagos. We have to, initially in the Obasanjo times, sometimes in the early 2000s, people are talking of the greater Lagos concept, which dovetails into parts of Ogun State, where Lagos workers live. And the whole idea was that Lagos and Ogun State governments, with the assistance of the federal government, would develop those corridors and speed up development of property, development of employment opportunities, and so on and so forth around all those places. Of course, it was a lot of beautiful plans that never came to fruition. But that's actually the way to go. That you want to see a lot of synergy between Lagos and Ogun State government to help people access land for building and to actually make simple building plans available, to facilitate access to inputs through maybe bulk purchase. So you can procure the inputs like cement and all of that in bulk at a lower cost so that people can, and government can also subsidize actually social organizations like cooperatives so that it also incentivizes more people to want to buy into such planned out schemes that will enable poor working people to build their own houses and thereby resolve some of the urgent housing challenges.
What you're speaking to, it's kind of at variance to what former governor of Lagos State had said, that government cannot deliver housing below the market price. I mean, this is one thing that.
But that argument itself is flawed. I want to contest that. Government is not interested in funding healthcare. You're contracting out to HMOs now. Government doesn't want to have anything to do with old age care and support system for its workers. It has to be PFAs and all of that. You contract everything to private sector. Then why are you government? What are you doing there? Anywhere in the world, government provides services. You are government because you provide social services. That's the primary function of the government, and the Constitution is very clear about it. Government has a responsibility to provide housing. It's fundamental human right. It's in section 16(2)(d) of the Nigerian Constitution. It's in Article 25 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It's in the SDG. So what are you talking about? So you can't do housing, you can't do health, you can't do education, you can't do nothing. You can't provide water. You want to privatize water supply. We must pay to the high heavens for electricity because it's privatized. And those who are not even ready to invest anything, but they want to take all of our money. What kind of governance is that? So that statement itself, because it has deep ideological import. Yeah. So you want to how will I put it now? You want to share for your responsibilities. Yeah. And that's why they have so much money to steal and waste all over the place. You see, so that statement itself is contestable. It is.
Because the land rights, the land use act that entrusts land in the hands of the state government pretty much empowers the state government a whole lot. Now the question is, you have power as a government to own land. The question is, who are you now giving the land to activate housing? And like you rightly said, a good opportunity for us is to identify vulnerable groups, and to, in fact, up to the point of, we have informal communities in the city of Lagos who actually have land rights, but they don't have, they have access, they own communal land historically. And one of the things we discover is that their rights is constantly being threatened, in the sense that a government can come today and say, okay, we want to do a housing, I want to do a project on your land, and come with your C of O. And a whole lot of these communities don't have certificate of occupancy.
What government is doing to a lot of indigenous communities, especially in Lagos State, is theft. They're actually stealing the land resources of those communities, because the communities own the land, and ordinarily you expect that government, if it's really interested in maybe regularizing housing development generally in those communities, on those spaces, you expect that government will encourage people to say, okay, come and register come for your land titles. We'll make it less cumbersome and very easy for people to regularize their land titles and have their CFOs, and of course also be enlightened about what they can do with it, some limits and so on and so forth. Yeah. You don't do that. And because people have to live in some housing, so people build. Then years down the line, because some big man wants to take over the place, you now invoke your right as government to access anybody's land, to simply steal those spaces. I call it stealing because at the end of the day, in most cases, when they take over those lands, they don't actually use it for public purposes. They don't use for public. They don't use to build public projects.
Yeah, as in the case of
it goes into private hands. That's stealing.
Magodo's case.
That's outright stealing. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be almost 1 year now, if not by the time we are putting up this broadcast. Owuroshoki's first eviction. What would be your reaction? What do you know about the eviction that went on in Owuroshoki? What would be your reaction to it? And 1 year after, what do you think we should be saying, or what do you think we should be doing?
Owuroshoki is a classic case of what I call government theft.
Owuroshoki eviction.
That's a very perfect illustration of government theft of communal land. because you say it's a littoral area, it's water, blah, 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 and so on and so forth, which became the excuse for eviction. But if that really is the intention, that you want to save people from water and all of that, we expect that you will intervene in a way that will help people to adjust to the environment. You understand? By providing basic infrastructures, and also by those that really have to be moved. You also ensure that they are moved to several places, which you must provide, because you are moving them from where they are, and where they are the right, at least traditional right to be. I mean, people don't just wake up in a space and say they are occupying it. Some transactions take place, because people have traditional rights to these spaces, and before they occupy it for housing, for livelihood, for whatever, and you want to come in because you think it's not safe and there is a threat of water, whatever.
Or you want to build, so like in the case of Oroshoki, in the a jetty.
Then if the jetty is about us, if the jetty is about the people of Oworonshoki, it shouldn't be a problem. First of all, we want to know the size of this jetty and its purpose. And of course, we will expect that the jetty will also serve the immediate environment of its location, which is Oworo.
And considering that right there in Oworo, there's actually a jetty that is not publicly
underutilized.
That is underutilized.
So
and you're displacing people
from it's just theft. So you're using that as an excuse to displace people. And of course, we know that even before the eviction started, flyers were all over the place by developers of what they want to build on the same place you want to evict people from. Flyers were all over the place. Prices are already being, it's already being priced in hundreds of millions of naira. And we know the people that are doing the stealing. So it's clear case of theft, because you just want to displace those people so that somebody has also said that it has become a means of money laundering. Government people just want to invest stolen.
Does that account for the reason why sometimes in the city of Lagos the cost of housing is just not something you can understand?
And why it has to be like that? It's simple law of demand and supply. Government is not building. People are not being allowed to build. The little effort they are making is being disrupted and destroyed. So, which means that housing is becoming more and more scarce. And you have a government that is telling you that it cannot build below market price. Then why are you in government for?
Interesting. So, what would be your final words if you were to have the audience with the governor of Lagos State to say, "Hey, this is the way for you to drive affordability"?
I think we've had occasions, including when the German Chancellor came visiting the other time, and we were privileged to meet with him, with the deputy governor, and we made the point that government has responsibilities. And maybe it will get to a point that Lagosians will also begin to realize that they also have a right to call these people to account. That you can't just run people. You can't even run poultry like this. The best will die. You get the point? You have responsibilities to provide services, of which housing is one. So, so the point is, the philosophical the philosophy that drives governance must change. This idea of government has no business with business, government has no responsibility for anything, including critical social services, is a very extremely costly ideas. At the end of the day, we are all losers, including themselves. Because the more you drive people into desperation, the more insecurity you breed. When we talk of insecurity, people think in terms of soldiers and policemen. those ones can't give you any security. Security starts with meeting with people's basic needs. And empirical experience all over the world have shown that the more people feel secure, the more physical security you have. Yeah. That's why you have the Scandinavian countries, the most secure people on this planet. Because they are the ones with the most advanced social security system. You take housing for granted, you take healthcare for granted, you take education for granted. So nobody is in desperation for anything. So you don't have crime. They're even closing down their prisons. And we are in the same planet. You get the point? And the more you have a system that drives people more and more into precarity and desperation, the more crime you have. Desperate people sometimes have no choice. So it's costly for all of us. Sometimes they also get kidnapped. And they fall victim of the system they created. Like we have said, 75% Lagos economy cannot be informal, and you are dreaming of highfalutin elephant projects and fanciful condominiums that less than 1% of the population can afford. So you have pockets of estates and condominiums that nobody can afford. They are empty. And you have individuals that own a couple of that all over the place. They are not, you can only live in one place at a time. So they buy all of these fanciful places. They are empty, they are locked up, and people can't find anywhere to live. The little place they manage, you destroy it. Under one excuse or the other. We can't continue that way. It's not working. It's not sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Gbenga Akomolafe. Like you rightly said, we can't continue that way. And I like what you said about the fact that the underlying principle of governance here is pretty much something that's faulty, which is government now getting involved in business rather than government making its business to be social services. I mean, in the city of Lagos, what you pretty much see a good number of times is just government now becoming a competitor in several sectors, even in the housing sector or the ideas or the buildings that we put up, still pretty much shows the posture that what our government is trying to do. Take for instance the LSDPC. I try to look at the houses being provided by the LSDPC. The LSDPC, that is a government agency, is pretty much just running like a real estate, any other real estate firm. I mean, that is
not the original vision. The original vision of LSDPC was to provide social housing.
Yeah. So we really need
that's what they set out to do.
We really need to rethink the principle behind the way we govern, and I think we need to make that shift. Thank you, Mr. Gbenga Akomolafe, for coming on Rethinking Lagos podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah, till we see you next time, please join all our social media handles and let us also have your comment. This is a discussion, this is a dialogue. It doesn't start and end here. Let's have your own opinion. Do you really think we need to rethink housing in Lagos? Thank you. Make your comments. See you next time.